Candelio. Starting out with the first likely red state, we have the state of Carolina. I'm going to put that into the likely red column. I largely think that Lindsey Graham will fairly easily coast to victory. Generally, this state is in the safe rate margin, but I think in an election year that's shaping up to be generally Democrat advantaged, I think that the state would narrow up from safe. Ultimately, doesn't matter too much. Still a seat for the Republicans, and that's going to bring them to 44 to Democrats 43. Should note that Republicans will need to win at least 6 of the remaining 13 states that have yet to be called in order to maintain their hold on the Senate. Currently, the map is 53 to 47, with Republicans having the 3-seat edge there, and Democrats are hoping to flip. They would need to flip 4 seats, and we'll see if that's possible. But we're going to go back to the likely red states. We're going to go now to the state of Montana. Going to put that into the likely red column, similar to South Carolina. Well, Montana actually, in the fairly recent history, has had a Democratic senator and even Democratic governors. It's been a little while longer since that. The most recent Democratic senator in the state of Montana, Jon Tester, lost his re-election bid in 2024, as well as a couple other candidates. It was definitely not a good year for the Democrats. That year, Republicans and Trump did quite well. But I think that the state will remain red in the 2026 midterms for the U.S. Senate race there in the state of Montana. And then we're going to head, I think that will be, we have the state of Florida. Going to put that into the likely red column as well. The state is almost certainly going to vote red. The state used to be arguably the biggest swing state by electoral college vote and population. Since that time, what states have been considered swing states have fluctuated, certainly, and Florida has, in the virtually every instant, has gone further to the right in the era of Trump. There are states that have counteracted that. For example, Georgia used to be relied on as a reliably Republican state. Now the state has 2 Democratic senators and voted for Trump. Well, Trump voted for Trump in 2024, but even voted for Biden in 2020. And it will be interesting to see what the gubernatorial election results come, how those result in the state of Georgia. But I think for the Senate election, well, we'll get back to Georgia. But like I said, lots of different states have shaped what a traditional swing state has been in the last couple of years. And then we're going to go, I think that will be the end of the likely red. We'll now go with the likely blue. We have the state of Minnesota. I'm going to put that into the likely blue column. I think this will be a very easy hold for Democrats. This state has had a long history of voting blue, one of the longest in the country, and the state has been, the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area has been in the news quite a bit, especially since the beginning of the second Trump administration. And I think that those No Kings protests and other protests that have been going on there are definitely a reflection that the state is not willing to elect a Republican and that it will elect a Democrat to the U.S. Senate. That's going to bring the Democrats to 44 to Republicans 46. And then we're going to get to the, we'll go now with the lean red states. We're going to go to Nebraska. We're going to put Nebraska into the lean red column. This seat is in a bit of an interesting situation. The candidate that's running against the Republican, Dan Osborne, is an independent, and he ran 2 years ago. He did, of course, end up losing 2 years ago to the other Senate seat, but he's kind of the de facto Democratic candidate, even though he's an independent. Democrats decided, well, the Democrat that won the nominee dropped out and endorsed Dan Osborne, and this will make the state quite a bit more competitive than it usually is. This sort of strategy has been tried in a couple states. Another fairly recent example is the state of Utah, where in 2022, Mike Lee faced against Evan McMullin, and McMullin got a lot of support from moderate Republicans as well as the moderate Democrats and more further left Democrats because he was the more Democratic-friendly option compared to Mike Lee. But this strategy it's been a while since it's been tried in a more competitive state. Certainly Utah and Nebraska are generally in the safe red column for the state at large. But I do think it would be interesting to see if this were to play in a state like Iowa or Ohio, Texas, Florida, Montana, really any those seats. I think Democrats may be more successful. And on the other end of the aisle, it would be interesting to see if Republicans were able to do it in states that are generally in the Democratic Party's column, but are certainly a little somewhat competitive, such as, New Hampshire, Maine, even New Mexico potentially. But that, I don't think it will ultimately result in a Senate seat flipping in Nebraska. That one I think is going to remain in the Republican Party's column. And then we're going to head over now. I think that will be the end of the lean red. Now we're going to go to the lean blue. Hinted at this state earlier. The state, Georgia, I'm going to put that into the lean blue column. The state, the current senator, incumbent senator, Jon Ossoff, is up for re-election, and I think he will fairly easily coast to victory. Jon Ossoff has strong fundraising game and is generally fairly well liked, especially for a senator in a very competitive swing state. So I think that Jon Ossoff will fairly easily coast to victory in the state of Georgia. That's going to bring Democrats up to 45 seats. Currently, well, at the moment, no seats have flipped one way or the other, but the first flip of the prediction will come in the state of North Carolina. The incumbent Republican senator, Thom Tillis, is retiring, and you probably heard of him in the news since the beginning of the second Trump administration, but he is retiring, and the Democrats are putting forward Roy Cooper, who is a former Democratic governor. Roy Cooper is fairly well liked. He has many North Carolinians think he did well as a governor, and I think that will reflect in his election results for the Senate. Democrats got a great candidate in him. The Republican candidate, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I don't think that the Republicans will be able to win this one. The state is very solidly in the Democratic Party's column. We can see that also on the map at large, have the Republicans with the narrow edge in the House, and, well, not in the House, but as far as North Carolina goes, that state I largely predict is going to go blue. And then we get to the second flip in the state of Maine. There's been quite a bit of news out of this state. In the last prediction, I had the state actually in the Republican Party's column, primarily because the Democratic nominee, Graham Plattner, had quite a few affairs, situations going on, and he was not put in a good light by really either party. Since then, he has dropped out, and Democrats are looking to nominate a different candidate. I think it will be crucial to see which candidate ends up winning the race in the new Democratic Party. But I think the majority of them would be able to narrowly beat Susan Collins. There are just fewer and fewer states that have senators from opposing political parties. So I think that Susan Collins will probably lose her seat in the state of Maine just because of Maine's general Democratic tilt. Although I could be wrong, the state, Susan Collins, has done well against notable Democrats in the past. So she may be able to there may be a miracle and she may be able to win again, but at the moment I think Democrats are nearly favored to win. And then we're going to get to the state of New Hampshire. This one I may even be willing to put in the likely column. I do think it'll be a little bit close, but pretty solid in the Democratic Party's column there, 8 to 47. And then that will be the end of the lean states for each respective party. Now we'll go to the tilt. We'll go a good mix of tilt Republican, tilt Democrat. For the first tilt state, we'll start with the Republicans. We're going to go with the state of Texas. In Texas, I think the state would most likely end up in the Republican Party's column. Ken Paxton, the Republican nominee, has had quite a few scandals coming up, and he'd be able to survive those and still get generally Democrats win this state. And I think that is very reasonable to expect. And then we'll get to the last three remaining states in Ohio, Iowa, and Alaska. So we'll start with the state of Alaska. This one I think will very narrowly go to the Democrat, Mary Peltola. She is a strong nominee. She actually has won this state at the House level in the past, a former member of Congress. And Alaska has a ranked choice voting system, so a bit of an interesting Republican senator from the state, but there are two Republican Dan Sulvins that are running for for the office of senator in the state of Alaska, so that will be interesting to see if that potentially results in a loss of votes for the incumbent Republican. And then we're going to get now to the state of Iowa. Iowa, I actually feel more confident in it going red than I feel in Alaska going blue. Iowa will most likely end up in the Republican Party's column. Going to put that in the reading there. And then really it comes down to the state of Ohio. This state will really be the state to determine which party wins Senate control. Democrats would need that state to get to 51. Republicans would need it to get to 50. And tie, they would hold the Senate. I do want to take a look at the prediction market overall odds. Republicans are favored to win the Senate, and I really think that Ohio will probably be the deciding vote and the deciding seat. The Senate college, I think that I'm going to election to the other House seat or to the other Senate seat in the state of Ohio. So that is going to be the call there. One more state in the Democratic Party's column in the state of Ohio. I'm not sure why it's still red, but that is going to be the final prediction, 51 to 49. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.